Have you ever had one of those nights where you just desperately needed sleep because the next day there was that big event, maybe at work or at school, or that big game or that big relational thing? And so you go to bed, and perhaps you go to bed around 10 o'clock, you look at the clock and you're like, okay, I'm going to get some sleep. It's going to work. And as you're laying there, you're thinking about, the next day, and you're excited about it. But then all of a sudden, this little thought begins to bounce in your brain that says, I have got to fall asleep. I have got to fall asleep. And it just bounces and bounces, and you ruminate on it, and you keep thinking about it, and you're like, hey, this is going to be good for me. I've got to fall asleep. I've got to fall asleep. And then you look at the clock, and you're like, it's 11:30 now. You sat there for an hour and a half thinking about sleep, and you're like, are you kidding me? And now you move into the math mode, right? Now you're starting to think, oh my gosh, I got to get up at 5, and so there's like 5.5 hours, and this is not going to be good. I mean, because, tomorrow, and the anxiety starts to happen, and now you're starting to feel that flood of anxiety because without 6 hours of sleep what that's going to do to you, and all of a sudden, you feel all that, and the thought comes back, I've just got to fall asleep. And then you look at the clock, and it's been another 2 hours. Anyone ever experienced that? Is that just me? Yes, thank you. We're all together. That is a terrible paradox, isn't it? I mean, it's the paradox. It's like the harder you try to sleep, the less sleep you get. The more you focus on it, the more you think about it, you're like, what is going on here? Why is this happening? Now, I share that to start our time because today we are in part 3 of this series called Paradoxes. And the reason why we're doing this series is because when you open the Bible, when you open the passages and you look at the teachings of Jesus, what you see over and over and over is he taught in a paradoxical way. That he would take conventional wisdom or conventional way of thinking and he would flip it upside down. He would invert it. And then he would say, trust me. And what you see throughout the scriptures and what you see experientially in life is that when we do that, there is something better. There is something more meaningful. And so that's why we're talking about this, because I so desire that for every single one of us. And so in week 1, Jen did a great job. She talked about a very difficult paradox of loving your enemies, because everything in us says, no, I don't want to love them. I want to punish them for what they did to me. Totally get that. But Jesus invited us to something different, and she unpacked that. And then last week, I talked about the way to greatness, or the way to greatness. And greatness not meaning like, hey, notoriety, hey, more fame and fortune. Greatness is life, a greater life, something more meaningful, something far more transcendent. What does that look like, Jesus? And he gave us 2 things, surrender and serving. Surrender and serving, which is like, what? How does that even fit in to greatness? And so if you weren't here in part 1 or part 2, I really want to encourage you to go back and listen to what we've said so far, because it's extraordinarily, extraordinarily helpful. Now, today what I want to do, just continue the conversation. So we're going to look at another paradox of Jesus. And today what I want to look at is one of the paradoxes, I would argue, that is probably one of the most misunderstood, misused, abused, specifically in the church, paradox of Jesus. And today, to the best of my ability, I just want to give you clarity. That when you walk out or when you turn off whatever device you're listening or watching, I just want you to be able to say, oh, that was so much more clear. And I want to give you some practical steps to actually trust Jesus and what that looks like in your life. Because if we're willing to trust Jesus with what we're going to talk about today, I mean, at least the research points to the fact that it will have a tremendous impact on your life. In fact, the research says this, that if we're willing to trust him in this area of our life, it leads to greater happiness, better physical health, stronger sense of purpose, lower depression and anxiety, and greater personal growth. And here's the thing, if you're a follower of Jesus or not, I mean, if you got a lot of questions about Jesus or you believe in Jesus, I think we all want this. I don't think there's a single person who goes, please give me more anxiety. I want that, please. I think all of us are like, how does this happen? What does this look like? And here's the wild thing. One of the greatest catalysts for us to experience that in every single one of our lives, regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not, is one word: generosity. Generosity. Now, when you hear that, perhaps your mind is going to tell you, something different. You may go, I don't think so. I mean, that feels like a paradox. Are you kidding me? Because here's what we think when it comes to generosity, that we believe this, and I get it. We think generosity is the outcome. In other words, if I can get to a certain financial status, then I'll be generous. If I can get more time in my life and more margin, then I'll be generous with my time. If I can get to a different place in my life, then I'll be generous. But what if it doesn't work that way? What if the research actually points to something different? What if generosity is the pathway to experience those things in life? What if it moves beyond correlation, because there is some connection with that, to causation? To say, this is a primary way, a primary pathway for you and I to experience these things. A greater level of happiness, more purpose, greater personal growth. What if that's actually true? Now here's what's wild. In 2014, researchers came together and they just said, hey, we want to see what generosity does in people's life. Like the totality of generosity, not just in one area, but in all kinds of areas of life. What's the impact on a human being? And they took all this empirical data, that means a lot of research, a lot of people over a long period of time. They took all this empirical data and they synthesized it, they put it all together in a book. And the book is called Paradox of Generosity. And I love the tagline, giving we receive, grasping we lose. In other words, the premise, the idea, is that the more we can step into generosity, it's like opening the door and saying, come on in. I welcome this greater thing that we all desire in life. And they're connected. And today I want to show you that. Now here's what's really cool. Is that was written in 2014. 2,000 years before this was published, Jesus spoke in to this dynamic. And today I actually want to show you what he said. But what I'm going to show you is a paradox, as I said earlier, that has been so misused and so abused and so used to manipulate specifically people in church or religious organizations to get an outcome. So today, again, to the best of my ability, I just want to give you clarity and the gift of what it looks like practically in our life to trust Jesus and what he says. So, he talks about this in Luke chapter 6. So we're going to be in Luke 6, and I want to give you a little bit of context to what's actually happening before we jump into the verse we're going to look at today. So in Luke 6, this is at the beginning of his ministry. So if you were here last week, I talked about the fact that Jesus had a 3-year ministry. And no one arguably shaped the world more after 3 years of ministry than Jesus. It's an amazing story. And so Jesus, in the very beginning, probably the first couple months of his ministry, he's beginning to teach, and people are looking at Jesus going, man, Jesus, no one's ever taught this way. Like it seems like you know God better than anyone we've ever heard from. It's like you've come from, there's something so unique about your teaching. So Jesus is starting to teach. He's gathering his 12 disciples. So there's Matthew and there's Peter and there's James and, there's Judas who was going to betray him later on. I mean, all the guys are following him. So he's got his guys together at this time. And then when Jesus would teach, something so unique about the movement of Jesus was his crowds. I mean, people had seen crowds before, but typically the crowd is associated with a communicator. It's like, hey, when the religious Pharisee communicates, all the religious people gather. When the person who's outside the temple communicates, all the other people gather. But with Jesus, it was radically different. In fact, I wrote this down. When Jesus spoke, the crowds were so diverse. There were followers and skeptics and seekers and hurting people, religious people, curious people. Guys, I'm telling you, we blow by that so quickly, but that is so incredibly important. No one had ever seen these kind of mixed crowds around a rabbi. What's going on there? And the reason I just want to pause just a second, that's not the point of the message today. But guys, the reason that's important is because the church is called the body of Christ. The local church should take the posture and the character, what is true of Jesus we should see in the local church. And one of the reasons why we do what we do is because when you look at the life of Jesus, the crowds were mixed. And people who were comfortable with Jesus should be comfortable with us. In fact, Jordan Geist, our lead pastor, talked about this in quite a bit more detail in a series a couple weeks ago called Brand New. If you guys didn't hear that, I really want to encourage you to go back and listen to what he said. But again, this is not the point of today. So you've got mixed crowds, early part of Jesus' ministry. And in Luke chapter 6, to give you the context without reading the whole chapter, he's inviting people to live a different way of life, a really risky way of life. This is like the kingdom kind of life. And he's saying, hey, I want to invite you to live this way. And here's some of the things he's saying. This is not an exhaustive list, but listen to some of this stuff. He's saying, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you, turn the other cheek. And you hear that, and imagine his crowd. I mean, this is the first time they've ever heard this stuff. They're like, what? Are you kidding me? None of this makes sense. And then he continues, he says, give generously of your possessions and of your money, lending without repayment. Don't judge. In other words, refuse to keep score. And by the way, if you choose to judge, then make sure, take the big old plank out of your eye, get some self-awareness before you begin to judge. They're like, what? And he says, don't condemn. In other words, believe the best and forgive. Forgive? What? I'm going to reward them for hurting me? And Jesus is talking about a risky way to live. And I'm telling you, the crowd is like, no, thank you. Thank you, Jesus. You seem to be quite amazing, but we will not live that way. Because if I live that way, I mean, I'm ultimately going to have less. I'm going to have less of a reputation. I'm going to be misunderstood. I mean, if I live that way and be radically generous with I'll have less money, I'll have less possessions, I'll have less time. I mean, I'm not going to win if somebody hurt. And that was their way of thinking. And so Jesus knew this. In Luke 6, he's reading the crowd. He knows the hearts, he knows the minds, he knows the questions. And he knows they're thinking, if I live this way you're inviting me to live, Jesus, I'm going to have less. This defies my logic. And so Jesus says, okay, let me speak into this. And in verse 38, I want to read verse 38 to you, and then we're going to unpack it together. And so here's how he responds. He says this, give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured out into your lap. For with the measure you used, it will be measured to you. Now, notice how Jesus starts here. He addresses the tension. He addresses the question that the people had. I will have less. And notice what Jesus doesn't say. Jesus doesn't say, give and you will have less. What he says is give, and it will be given to you. In other words, guys, I understand. I understand generosity is this kind of posture. And this kind of posture goes this way. If I give of my time, I have less time, Jesus. If I give of my possessions, I have less possessions, Jesus. If I give forgiveness, I lose, Jesus. Like, what are you getting at? Is that the reality? Jesus says, no. No, in fact, it's quite the opposite of what you think. Give, and it will be given to you. How can you say this, Jesus? And Jesus substantiates this reality by one thing, God. God. In other words, it's almost like he whispers to the crowd, have you forgotten who God is? Do you know the generosity of God, the radical generosity? Do you know the character of God? Have you lost sight of that? And then what he says next begins to unpack how radically generous God is. And it made sense to the first century crowd. When you hear it, perhaps it's a little bit confusing, but I'll explain it. Here's how he explains this. He goes, let me tell you about the heart of God, the generosity of God. He says, given it will be given to you. And now here's God. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured out into your lap. Now, at first reading, when you read that, sometimes you go like, what are you talking about here, Jesus? Is this like a new dance move? Shake it around, press it down? Something like, you're like, what are you getting at? This makes no sense. In a first century crowd, they totally got this. They were like, oh yeah, I've seen this 1,000 times. I mean, they lived in an agrarian culture, right? Grain and farm animals, the whole thing. And here's the picture Jesus is painting. Keep in mind, this is about the heart of God, the generosity of God. He goes, this is how it works. He goes, let me tell you about God. That he's going to give you a good measure, a full measure. In other words, here's this barrel. He's going to fill it all the way up to the very top. Then he's going to press it down to create more space. And then he's going to shake it together to create even more capacity. And then he's going to fill it up to its very fullest capacity. In fact, he's going to fill it up so much so that it's going to spill over into your lap. Don't you know That's God and his extravagant generosity? In fact, that's his point. He's reminding the audience of the first century, he's reminding us today, he's saying, hey, God is extravagantly generous. So in other words, I hear you. I understand the pushback. I understand the logic part of this where you're like, I'm going to have less. And that oftentimes in Jesus' crowd, here's what they were thinking. They were like, well, if I live this way, Jesus, radical generosity, what about food? What about clothing? What about my family? What about my security? What about my future? What about what I own? It's like, have you not considered the radical generosity of God? And then to contextualize it to us this week, I was thinking about, what would we say? We would say, hey, Jesus, if I live this way, what about inflation? Do you understand that? What about my job in AI? What's going to happen with all of that? What about my future? What about my kids? What about my retirement? What about the price of beef? Have you guys seen the price of beef lately? I mean, you go to Whataburger and you're like, how much? That is radically expensive. You're like, Jesus, what's happening here? And here's his point. He goes, guys, I get it. I understand life. I understand the pressures. I understand the responsibilities. I get all of this. But the reason you can live generously is because your Father is extravagantly generous. Have you thought about that lately? Have you contemplated how generous God is to you lately? Because that's the foundation for us to be generous. That the foundation of generosity is the generosity of God. In fact, this week, I was just thinking about this. I was going, okay, what does this look like? How has God been generous to me in my life? What does that look like? I wrote a few things down. I want to read these to you. You know, when I think of the generosity of God, I think life is generosity. I didn't earn it. God gave me life. What an incredible gift he's given. I think breath is generosity. The fact that you and I have breath today means your story is not finished, which means you have purpose. Sitting here, I know you have purpose and meaning because you're breathing. Your story is not finished. That is the generosity of God. Grace is generosity. You see, mercy is you don't get what you deserve. Grace is you get exactly what you don't deserve. It's like, oh my gosh, you committed the offense, but now I'm going to give you an incredible blessing on top. What? Paul, the Apostle Paul in the Scriptures said, God's grace is amazing. It's relentless like the waves of the ocean, over and over and over. He's so generous. Forgiveness is generosity. God didn't ignore the debt I created. He actually paid for it with his Son. Are you kidding me? You paid for what I did? How generous are you, God? Adoption is generosity. That I have the right to be a son, or you have the right to be a son or daughter of God through Jesus. Eternal life is generosity. Our greatest problem has been solved. We don't have to fear death or wonder about eternity. God has been so generous and already solved that through Jesus. And the greatest expression of God's generosity to you and to me, that sometimes life can get so busy or whatever's happening, we lose sight of that. But the greatest demonstration is one name that is above every name, Jesus. For God so loved the world that he was extraordinarily generous. He gave the most expensive thing. He gave everything for you and me. That's the radical generosity of God. So again, just think about this. Do you contemplate that at all? Do you process that at all? Is that something you intentionally maybe this week or the last couple weeks have focused on? How generous God is? Jesus is giving us the foundation. His point is the foundation of generosity is the generosity of God. And I've seen this demonstrated in so many different ways, or the implication to our life. In fact, a few weeks ago, I met with a gentleman who's new to North Point, and he was telling me he's not a follower of Christ, but he just loves coming. And I was like, that's awesome. And so we were talking about life, and he said, hey, I want to meet with you because I have this thing within me. I'm just curious what to do with it. He's like, I'm extremely angry. And he told me the reason why. He said, because this person betrayed me, and here's what happened, and he couldn't sleep I mean, he's carrying with it all day long. He's just, I mean, it's so much anxiety, so many things. And so he gave all this context. And as I heard it, I was like, yeah, I totally get it. And so he said, Buck, what do I do with this? What do I do with this? I said, well, it's one word. It's forgiveness. Forgiveness. I said, be careful. Don't pursue cheap religious forgiveness. Cheap religious forgiveness is that idea to go, hey, you come to church, the preacher or religious leader gets up, and they say, hey, let's look at Colossians 3, forgive as the Lord's forgiven you. Go home today, read that verse, wake up tomorrow, pray, and say, I have forgiven them. You try that and tell me how that works, right? Maybe you try that and you're like, nothing really changed, I'm still angry, right? And so I said, listen, forgiveness, it's a process. There are steps and stages to forgiveness. Sometimes it'll take a week. Sometimes it'll take a year. Sometimes it could take 5 years, depending on the offense and what happened to you. It's a big deal. And so we walk through the steps and stages of forgiveness. And the last stage of forgiveness is canceling the debt. And because you work through stage 1, 2, and 3, you actually know what you're canceling. There's meaning to it. And I said, here's the deal. I'm not sure how you can totally forgive, authentically forgive, and cancel the debt without Jesus. Maybe you can draw from an experience of your father, or maybe a friend who's forgiven you, but that divine, authentic space to say, I cancel the debt of what you did, I don't know how you do that without Jesus. So I said, my encouragement is this week, over the next couple of weeks, just stand at the cross. Just look at what Christ has done. And look at how much he has forgiven you for past, present, future, for everything you did last night, last week, 10 years ago. It's totally forgiven. And forgiven people forgive. The ability to be generous with forgiveness, the foundation of that, the motivation of that, is the radical generosity of God. And then Jesus continues. And here's where it gets a little tricky, and so I will try to explain what he's saying. He continues, and he ends verse 38, and he says, for with the measure you used, it will be measured to you. So here's the baseline. He's basically saying the motivation, right, is the generosity of God. So typically in life, this is how we hold things. We hold things with a tight grip. We're like, it's my money, my time, my stuff, whatever it may be, right? And then he's saying, hey, as you begin to see the generosity of God and you kind of open it halfway, well, to the degree you're opening it is the degree that you can receive. And then when you finally get to a place to go, okay, God, I trust you, look at the posture of your hands. Now you can fully receive. And here's where it gets tricky, because perhaps you've heard from maybe something you saw on TV, maybe something you've been part of. Some religious leader get up and they use this passage, and they say things like this. Now, here's the deal. If you give $1, you're going to get 10. If you give 10, you're going to give 100. You give 1,000, you're going to get 10,000. God will pour in, press down, shake up, and he's going to pour so much in your lap. So go ahead and be radically generous with your money. Give money. Or when it comes to faith, hey, just a little bit of faith. Come on, a little bit more faith. And faith turns into a formula. And all of a sudden, if you have a little bit of faith, you can heal your son. If you have a little faith, you can change your outcomes, and you can get that house, and you can get that job. Just have more faith. And you apply that. And you do these different, and you're like, there's something that just doesn't set right with that. And you are correct. It shouldn't set right. Because the danger in doing that, if we continue to treat God like this transaction, before long, we turn God into this, a vending machine God, right? Where it's like, oh, it's quick, it's easy, and it's guaranteed. Just give some money today. You're like, really? And this is what we do. I mean, think about this. This is how we treat God. Okay, God, I got a little bit of money first time I heard this sermon or I read this book. I'm going to give you some money, okay? And I'm going to put the money in the vending machine. I'm going to hit that button. And now, God, because I gave you, you owe me. Or God, faith. You know faith. I'm going to have a little bit more faith, whatever that really means. I'm going to put it in the machine. I'm going to hit the button. And now you owe me what I am having faith for. Or God, prayer. I'm not a man of prayer, woman of prayer, but I heard this thing, so I'm going to try it. I'm going to roll the dice with you. I'm going to roll the dice, put it in, push the button, and whatever I'm praying for, you better give me. You owe me. It's transactional. I put it in, I get this. Now, hold that in your mind just a second. When it comes to a vending machine, my favorite candy bar is Snickers. I love Snickers. You mix that in ice cream with a little Oreos, it's delicious. It's wonderful, right? And so in a vending machine, if I go up to a vending machine and I put the money in and I go, hey, A7 Snickers, that's what it says, that's what you owe me. I put the money in and it starts to go, and then the Snickers bar gets caught. I don't know what you do, but here's what I do. I begin to go like, what just happened? That is wrong. And I begin to like bump it real gently. Nothing's happening. Snickers still stuck. And then I start shaking the machine, then I kick it a little bit. And then eventually, if nothing happens, if I don't get my Snickers, then I just walk away and I'm angry. And I'm like, and then I tell people about that machine. Don't go to that machine. It's a terrible machine. Don't we do the same thing with God in church? Don't we do that same kind of thing? I mean, I prayed, I gave, I had faith. God, you owe me. That is transactional. And that is not what Jesus is inviting you or I into. In fact, that is just religion. That is not the good news of Jesus Christ. And here's the point. You see, that's not love. Relationships, they thrive on love. Transactions thrive on leverage. I need leverage over you. And if you've ever been in a transactional relationship or a relationship that's like a scorecard relationship, maybe in a marriage, friendship, whatever it is, parenting relationship, you know how that feels. It's like, hey, I'm going to do these 3 things. You're going to do those 2. We're going to keep this agreement. We better, and there's like 2 auditors. I'm going to audit you. You're going to audit me. And you go back and forth. What does that feel like? If you've ever been in a transactional relationship, over time, what does that feel like? It certainly moves from love, maybe that's how it started, to something that feels far more empty. Maybe it started as love, I just do this because I love you, to something that feels far more less intimate. There's no intimacy in that. And that's Jesus' point. He's saying, guys, this whole thing is not about the transaction. I am not generous, so I get. I've looked at the generosity of God. That's the foundation. That generosity, Jesus is teaching us, the foundation for our generosity is not to get. That, again, is religion. We're talking about something so much better. God has already satisfied the transaction we keep trying to satisfy in His Son, Jesus Christ. You're already loved. You're already forgiven through Christ. You don't have to go earn it. It's been done. Do you contemplate that? Do you process that? Do you think about that? That's the motivation and foundation for our generosity. Or to say it a different way, the reason we can live with our hands like this is because Jesus opened His hands first. I can serve because you came to serve and to give your life as a ransom. I can be generous because that's what you've done for me. I can forgive because that's what you've done for me. And all I can tell you is the more we begin to trust Jesus and move from tight grips, a little bit of openness, I trust you because I've thought about, contemplated your radical generosity. The more we move here, the fuller life becomes. What does that look like? The full life? Well, in 2014, it was captured. The best we can tell, the empirical data would say, when you and I live a life consistently, not one time, but day after day, month after month, year after year like this, here's what they said and summarized. That the more generous people are, the more happiness, health, purpose, and meaning in life they enjoy. Jesus came to invite you into life and life to the full. Not a transaction, but based upon the radical, extravagant generosity of God. So, my question for you, just in your personal life, as I've been talking, is there anything that you're gripping? What are you gripping? What do you have your hands on like this? Is there perhaps, as I've been talking, it's so clear to you it's money. Right now you're like, yep, it's money. It's my money. I worked for it. I'm more responsible than everybody else. I've got my hands around my money. It's my security. Don't you touch it or talk about it. Is it money? Is it time? Do you have your hands around time? If you understood how busy I am and you understood all my responsibilities, I never will have the time. It's my time. Is it convenience? Is it comfort? Is it forgiveness? If you understood what that person did to me, you would understand why I hold my hands like this. With whatever that is, the motivation and foundation to go from here to here is not to get. Jesus just taught us the motivation is begin to look at Jesus. Look at what he's done for you. Consider the outcome of his life and his radical generosity to you. And it's through that we can move from this posture to this posture. Say, God, okay, I trust you. You know exactly what I need financially. You know what I need in my responsibilities. You know what inflation's done. You know all of that, but God, I trust you. It is yours. With time, God, with time, I don't exactly know, but you know what? I trust you, and I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to choose to volunteer. I'm going to choose to leverage my time that way because look at what you've done for me. With forgiveness, what does that look like to go from here to here? I don't know. Maybe that's meeting with a pastor, meeting with a counselor, and saying, finally, I'm going to get to the bottom of what's happening here. Whatever it is, my question is for you. What does that look like? What are you gripping? And what does it look like to go from here to here? And guys, all I can tell you from my personal experience, all I can tell you after being on the other side of meeting with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, this will be one of the most difficult things you do. Trusting is difficult. But what I can tell you experientially for Jill and I, and for so many people, the more that you move from this posture to this posture, not to get, but because you have contemplated, you have considered the radical generosity of God, it moves to a place where you genuinely do experience a fuller life. That open hands, fuller life. And that's what Jesus came and said. I have come to give you life and life to the full. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for today and the fact that we can come together like this and just contemplate these things, think about these things. Father, thank you that you preserved the scriptures and that you taught in such a way to get to the heart of what's really going on. So God, you know every single person in this room, you know everyone listening online. God, you know where our fists are tight and what we're gripping. So would you, in your unconditional love, in your just gentleness, in your grace, would you pursue us this week and show us exactly what it looks like to trust you? May we know that's from you, and then may we trust you and follow you. God, whatever that looks like, I surrender that. I trust that to you. Thank you for today. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next week.